Terence Crawford a better pound-for-pound fighter than Canelo Alvarez, but can't sell 10,000 pay-per-views and ducked Errol Spence Jr. Alright, y'all. It's your boy Cardinal Red Sports. Let's talk about it. So, DAZN News, DAZN.com, released their pound-for-pound fighter list. And surprisingly, Terence Bud Crawford is the top dog name. Now, they did a comparison between Canelo Alvarez and Terence Bud Crawford to decide who would be the number one pound-for-pound fighter according to DAZN Sports. Now, this is fight week for Terence Bud Crawford, David Avanesian. A lot of news coming out about that fight. You know, mainly the Eddie Hearn news that came out yesterday on Fight Hype TV, where Eddie Hearn kind of broke down the problem with Terence Crawford's career, the problem he has with the David Avanesian fight, and why he believes the fight would only sell 10,000 pay-per-view buys. Now, I want to give my 2 cents on, is Terence Crawford the best pound-for-pound? Why does 10K pay-per-views matter? And what will be the result of ducking Errol the Truth Spence Jr. on Terence Crawford's career? Let's start with Canelo and Terence Crawford. Who is the better out of those two fighters? Now, we all know we live in the times of the O, where your O is the most important thing to most boxers today. Having an O means you're undefeated. Having an O means you're the best at whatever weight class you're in, especially if you can couple that O with a title belt. And having an O translates to millions of dollars if you can do it in the fashion of a Floyd Mayweather. Terence Crawford has an O. Canelo Alvarez had an O, but lost his O years ago to what many believe is the best fighter in the world, Floyd Mayweather, Money Mayweather. And you got to give Canelo Alvarez a lot of credit for not only challenging himself with the Floyd Mayweather fight, but being willing to do it in his younger days, not having to wait until he was 30-something years old to make his biggest fight. Because I think Canelo saw the bigger picture. Win or lose, I benefit from Floyd Mayweather's name. Win or lose, and I'm young enough to where if I do lose, I can revamp my career as long as I'm willing to fight some of the best fighters and win some of those fights. You know, and I think that's what Canelo Alvarez took advantage of, where Terence Crawford didn't take advantage of that. You know, Terence Crawford's Money Mayweather fight should have been this guy. It should have been Manny Pacquiao when they both were on top-ranked boxing. And I think that would have definitely put Terence Crawford on the level of a Canelo Alvarez when it comes to popularity. Now, is popularity the most important thing? I think here's where the contrast comes in for Terence Crawford. I think Terence Crawford doesn't really care about being famous. You know, I did a video yesterday, go check that out, about him being a local celebrity, you know, being subjected to the Omaha, Nebraska area and only being famous in that area. But I don't think Terence Crawford cares that much about being famous. I think his thing is, well, do I have my O? Am I making the most money I can possibly make? And am I a champion? Because I think Hall of Fame status means more to Terence Crawford than fame does. Now, Hall of Fame status definitely will last longer than fame. You know, you can be famous and not be famous tomorrow because you lost a fight. Or you can be in the Hall of Fame because you never lost a fight. You were a champion for umpteen amount of years. It doesn't matter if you fought the best competition. You were a champion when you retired. You had an O when you retired. That makes you, you know, one of the greatest in the Hall of Fame. Now, is that Terence Crawford's ultimate goal? Is to be in the Hall of Fame, to be remembered for something historical in the sport, which, you know, retiring with an O, retiring with over 40 wins and an O would be historical. And retiring with a belt, 40 wins and an O would be, you know, I think one of a kind in boxing. So You know, it depends on how you look at the situation. For Canelo Alvarez, he decided that being more popular, being more famous, and making more money off of his fights, and you know, popularity brings in money. Taking on Floyd Mayweather did all those things for him, and he did it early in his career to where even though he lost that fight, it didn't negatively affect his career, and he's been able to take on top-notch challengers ever since, and it's done nothing but help Canelo. In many people's mind, Canelo is the best fighter in the world, even though he has a few losses on his record. Now, I know this, once again, is the generation of the O, and everybody respects the O. But when you compare Crawford and Canelo, you got the first thing that comes to mind is, well, the competition levels are way different between those fighters. And Canelo took on some of the greatest names in the sport of boxing. Crawford took on a few great names at 140, but since he's moved up in weight, has been reluctant to take on the best competition and has used money as an excuse for why he doesn't have to do that. And I think at the end of the day, when it comes to Errol Spence and Terence Crawford and him ducking Errol Spence, if he never takes on Errol Spence, that will define the rest of Terence Crawford's career. Whether Terence Crawford does make it to the Hall of Fame or not, whether Terence Crawford is remembered as one of the best fighters because he retired with a belt, even though it's only one belt, and he retired with an O, and he retired with one of the best boxing records in the welterweight division, does that trump Errol Spence and him possibly becoming undisputed? You know, let's say Terence Crawford goes the rest of his career, never fights Errol Spence, ends up retiring 2 or 3 years from now from the sport. Errol Spence ultimately ends up picking up that WBO strap anyway and becomes undisputed, retires without fighting Terence Crawford. Does that negatively affect his career? I don't think so, especially if he goes ahead with this Thurman fight. I think PBC fans will give him a lot of credit for beating Thurman. Me personally, I don't really think the Thurman fight matters too much, but I think PBC fans, and there's some hardcore boxing fans that will respect him for picking up that win. Whoever he picks up the WBO title from, if Terence Crawford does end up not fighting him and drops that strap once he retires, and Errol Spence ends up picking it up from, let's say, a Jaron Ennis or a Virgil Ortiz or whoever ends up with that belt and does ultimately become undisputed, just doesn't go through Terence Crawford, I don't think anybody will care that he didn't fight Terence Crawford. But I think it's the reverse for Terence Crawford. If he never fights Errol Spence, I think that will define the rest of his career because everybody will remember he ducked Errol Spence. On the other hand, Errol Spence has already been through a bunch of championship fights at 147, had a bunch of wars at 147, would have beaten the best young guys at 147 and became undisputed, retired with an O and retired with over 40 wins and an O and undisputed title belts. You know, that is way more history making than what Terence Crawford has accomplished. So even in the history books or even in the Hall of Fame, if those two career paths do take that road, and that's how it ultimately ends up ending for both of those guys, I think that Errol Spence's name is always going to trump Terence Crawford based off the competition level, based off the undisputed, and based off the fact that Terence Crawford would have waited too late within his career to really try to challenge himself. Now, he might have won the battle by, making it that far, retiring undefeated, retiring with a belt, but ultimately Errol Spence would have won the war because he would have actually became undisputed. He would have fought all the best competition, no questions asked, and he would have retired with all of those accolades. And once again, the Hall of Fame, I think when people look back in the history books, they're going to see Errol Spence's name as trumping Terence Crawford's name every time, and that will most definitely be one of the reasons. I think Errol Spence will ultimately beat Canelo Alvarez out in the history books as well if he can pull it all off. Right now, they have Terence Crawford number 1, pound for pound, Canelo number 2, and Errol Spence number 3, which I think is completely unfair and backwards. But Y'all let me know what y'all think about that down in the comment section below. Is Terence Crawford pound for pound better than Canelo Alvarez, and will him ducking Errol Spence Jr. have an effect on the rest of his career, as well as the David Anesian pay-per-view buys? With that 10K buys, if he doesn't do 10K, if he does less than 10K, if he does above 10K, how do y'all think that will affect his career? Hit that like button for me, share, subscribe. Holler at me on all social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. More than likely to get a response on the tube. Holler at me over there. It's your boy, and we are Manny.
Now I was high when I made the song, so you gotta get high when they play the song. See them chicks get live and they shake their thongs. Young niggas run lines tryna take them home, and if a nigga hate mine, I'ma break his bone. See them whips outside on crazy chrome. Little mama, don't take me wrong, but my lap is where your face belong. I stay stuck like a 9 with the safety on. Flow hot like islands you take vacations on. OG, where you hatin'? You can get a few shots to your apron. Dog, I ain't got a lot of patience. When I see what I want, gotta take it. Right now I'm just looking at her shake it. Soon she get through, we shaking. OG.